Mandy Friedman here, licensed professional clinical counselor, clinically certified domestic violence counselor, clinically certified trauma professional level 2, and the creator of SNAP Survivors of Narcissistic and Abusive Personalities. I'm back with Michelle Minette. Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
Now, Michelle, can you introduce yourself one more time to everyone? Tell us about your business. Maybe tell us a little bit about your program.
Okay. So, Michelle Minette. I run F All That Wellness Coaching, which is in Hamilton, Ohio, but I do a lot over telehealth as well. And so I specialize in helping people heal from narcissistic abuse and toxic relationships. And I am developing programs to help women feel more empowered that are developed from all of the lessons that I've learned healing from and helping others heal from narcissistic abuse and toxic relationships. So I'm pretty excited about that. I also run a support group that meets online every other week called SNAG, Surviving Narcissistic Abuse Group.
One of the things that you've learned about along the way is this concept of the silver lining syndrome. And prior to recording, we were brainstorming a little bit, and we found a lot of things that fell under this umbrella of the topic of silver lining syndrome. Michelle, can you sort of bring us into this topic and explain what it is that we mean by silver lining syndrome?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a concept that I am still learning about and figuring out what other people know about, right? I just started calling it silver lining syndrome because I noticed that there were people who were affected by or in narcissistic abusive systems that tend to only recall instances that were favorable, right? Like there tends to be this complete focus on what's happening that's positive or that can be put in a positive way. To the point where they're blind or they don't see anything that's wrong or detrimental or harmful or even abusive. And so when I started looking it up, like there's toxic positivity, Pollyanna syndrome, right? Betrayal, blindness, which I think is very much in line with what I was seeing. And then optimism bias that actually ends up leading into overconfidence bias, a whole bunch of terms there. But when we started talking about it, you were like, oh yes, I recognize this as betrayal bias. Can you explain more about what that is?
Yeah. Okay. So Dr. Jennifer Freyd, she came up with DARVO, Deny, Attack, Reverse, Victim, and Offender. She's also someone who has studied betrayal trauma. And a concept that she has developed is betrayal blindness, or institutional betrayal blindness. And she discusses how there's this phenomenon where people just are blind to things that are happening right in front of their face.
Okay. And so does she get in? Because I know that like when I started to recognize that this was happening, obviously, like I noticed a little bit of it in my personal life, right? And we're floored by, wow, like, how did they not see that? Like, what is going on here? I know you're smarter than that, you know? And then in working with my clients here and there, whether it's with couples or I'm working with, you know, survivors, it's as if there was maybe some kind of like survival tactic happening where somebody couldn't admit that their situation or couldn't feel anymore about how bad it was.
I think you're right that there's survival mechanisms within us. And one of those survival mechanisms is to keep us connected to a tribe or to a group or to a family, that we're safer if we're in the group. And that is what should come first, is your membership to that group. And the idea of being ostracized or no longer in it would lead to your death. So we have within us, in our genetic code, the need to be a part of. And so when you are blind to something that's happening in front of your face, it does serve a purpose of sorts. It serves a subconscious purpose, perhaps. And I wanted, if you wouldn't mind, Michelle, because I'm already starting to head off into the arena of the narcissistic amnesia. And maybe we should make sure that we are delineating between people that are doing this and they are truly blind. They do not know that they're doing it.
Right.
And then others who might appear that way, but what they're doing is they're controlling the narrative. They're controlling the context by omitting things or whitewashing or minimizing. What's the difference? What's your opinion?
Okay. Well, I want to take it back a little bit further
Yeah.
too, right? Because I've heard people talk about toxic positivity and, the arguments back and forth even on that, and so I don't want to talk about how positivity is not good for you, right? Faking it to make it works. And so acting in a positive way in situations to a certain extent can absolutely be helpful. It can help you survive the situation. It becomes a problem when you're not honoring the emotions that happen during that time period. So using the positivity to get through a difficult time and then doubling back to go through the emotions of everything that was overlooked in order to survive is important, right? And that's when it becomes toxic, is when it leads to what we might call rug sweeping. A lot of our people we work with know what that is, right? When the toxic positivity leads to minimization or invalidation of yourself or others, then that's when it becomes a problem. And I think that's what we're talking about with the betrayal blindness, right? There's this blindness. And so when I think of betrayal blindness versus the narcissistic amnesia, right? I think of that study on rats, right? Where they talk about learned helplessness, right? Where, I don't know, it might've been a mouse, rodents, we'll just call them rodents, but where the rodents would get shocked when they tried to eat out of their bowl. And then they got to the point where they didn't even try to eat anymore. They learned that they had no agency, meaning they could not change the circumstances, of their life, right? And so they laid down and they would die of starvation. But then they did a follow-up to that, and eventually they would open up the cage. And even though the rodent could see that the cage was open, they didn't even try to escape. They had learned that they were that ineffective, that wouldn't work anyway. Ho hum. And so when I think of this betrayal blindness or this silver lining syndrome, right, that I tried to coin it, I actually kind of picture that learned helplessness situation where I can't do anything about the situation, so I might as well do something internally about the situation. And the brain's like, we can't handle this. It's too heavy. So we're just going to cut it off. That didn't happen. What can I live with? I can live with this, and then focus only on that. And so then the narcissistic amnesia is intentional, right? I mean, and people can always argue that all this stuff came out of survival tactics from trauma, right? But the betrayal blindness is, I think, almost like an autonomic. It's an automatic thing that has happened in order to protect how somebody feels in a person that still has a core sense of self and still has feelings.
So let me get this straight. Are you saying that potentially entire groups of people could be lulled into being blind, that they are actually making decisions and acting against their own self-interest and not seeing what's right in front of their face?
I absolutely am saying that.
I thought that's what you were saying.
I mean, cults.
Exactly. Yes. So these things happen between two people. They happen in families. They happen on the world stage. They happen in corporations. And this, you might be working for a company, for example, and you know that there's bad things happening there. And everybody knows that there's bad things happening there, but it's culturally within the company acceptable that those things happen. And slowly over time, people, their moral compass is eroded. There's a way that we can, it's not brainwashing in a sense. You're in this environment over and over again, and it's important. You want to belong to it. It's your survival, as a matter of fact. And they're all fine with it. Whatever the thing is, no one seems to have a problem with it. So it becomes not a thing. If it's not a thing, it's not a thing. And furthermore, if you raise it up as being a thing, you're out. And how dare you?
Right.
How dare you speak of us in that way? And, you know, we've done these things for you, blah, blah, blah. And now you're ostracized. So again, it's happening subconsciously, but you can definitely see how in the conscious realm it plays out for the person, that they don't want. The fear is that if I am different, then I am not accepted. But under this umbrella of silver lining syndrome, you mentioned toxic positivity. We talked about betrayal, blindness. Then we moved into narcissistic amnesia,
Right.
but also misplaced compassion and abuse apologists.
Right.
And then we had the House of Cards scenario. So I thought maybe we could focus on a couple of those and describe what those concepts are. And then any of the ones that you had as well. You mentioned Pollyanna.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was just one of the terms that I came across. But I would like to give an example of like the difference between betrayal, blindness, and narcissistic amnesia, right? So let's say somebody has a narcissistically abusive mother, and the mother tells the child, you're an asshole and we will disown you as a family if you don't show up to my birthday party this weekend, right? And the enabling father, right, other parent, says, is presented with that statement and says in response, you know what, I just see a mother that loves their daughter and wants her to come home and spend time with the family and misses her terribly. That's betrayal blindness, right? Then the mother says, I don't know what you're talking about. I never said that. I would never say anything like that. That's narcissistic amnesia. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah.
One is without, you're not aware that you're doing it, but the other is strategic.
Absolutely. The one is protecting themselves as much as the abuser, and not realizing that they're not being compassionate or that they're invalidating their child. And I think that leads us right into the House of Cards. Do you want to talk about the House of Cards analogy?
Yes, this was something that we talked about, that for a lot of people that are avoiding the truth, or they're avoiding some big important fact that's right in front of their face, someone builds their entire theory of mind, their self-concept, their concept of their society, how they fit in with society, how they fit in with their family, their gender roles. All of that gets created within a person throughout the course of their life. And much of that can be built on some faulty pieces that are untrue. And by approaching that and moving one piece to say, oh, I was mistaken, this part was incorrect, means that the whole house of cards falls down. So as a family of alcoholics that's in denial about it, if one person goes to get sober, that puts a big old mirror up to the whole family. And it can pull the house of cards out from underneath of them, in the sense of that there's nothing wrong with us and there's nothing that can be done about it and we're all okay and it's not that bad. But Bobby over there's got 2 years sober now and he's looking pretty healthy and his life's going really well. Right. Oh, well, he just thinks that he's better than everybody else, usually is how that conversation goes.
Yeah.
So the house of cards means that if you touch one part, it all falls. But it's also faulty. I think that's the important part of it, is that it's flimsy and faulty, and it could easily be poked through. So then the person is especially defensive then of those points. What's your description of a house of cards?
Well, I like that description. I think that you hit the nail on the head, right? I think a good example, though, if we take the example from before and apply it, right? So there's this house of cards. And so that enabling father, we have to recognize that in order for him to realize that what was said to his child was abusive and was not okay, means that he would also have to then, in his house of cards, recognize that he couldn't even protect himself from the abuse. So he couldn't have protected his children. And then you can go even further back and be like, well, how did he end up in that situation? well, then he might have to then admit that his parents were abusive. And so this betrayal blindness keeps that house of cards erect, for lack of a better word. Sorry. Standing.
That's funny. Okay, so, but in addition to the house of cards, we also have this sort of like misplaced compassion and almost like a I'm more virtuous and better than because I see the best in others. So then we become this like abuse apologist. They didn't mean it that way. You know, they were abused as a child. And I see some really good qualities in this person too. The other day, they did this really super nice thing. And so I just don't think that it,
Right.
it's frustrating.
Right. All these enabling tactics that we're pulling out today, right? Yeah. And there is that virtue, right? Like you see people walking around being like, well, I'm a good person because I see the good in everybody, you know, and what they really mean, because I could say we probably couldn't do what we do, Mandy, if we didn't see the good in everybody, right? But that's a different, our ability to see the good in everybody kind of falls under the header of radical acceptance. And we can talk about that another day. Whereas this dialectic can exist. I can see the good in you and also recognize that there's stuff going on that's not good for me. And so we're not going to be hanging around at all anymore. We're not going to have contact. Right? Which is different than this abuse apologist that combines these two things that aren't meant to be combined and says, because I can understand where it came from, or because I can see the good in this person, then I also owe them my compassion, my empathy, my friendship, my emotionally intimate thoughts and feelings. Right, then I need to still be their friend because I can see the good in them. And those things can be mutually exclusive.
That was a really great description of how all those things come together.
Oh,
That's great. Yeah. And one other thing that you had mentioned had to do with individuals that might be over controlled versus dysregulated. And that potentially the silver lining syndrome would fall under the category of someone who is overly controlled. Can you describe that a little bit further for us?
yeah. I mean, I'd like to do more research to pull it all together. And I'm sure other people have done the research that I can look up to pull it all together. But yes, you know, I've noticed that in these people that have the silver lining syndrome that have adapted to have this functional skill of betrayal blindness that is now unhealthy. They also tend to be what we would call over controlled, meaning there's a little bit of detachment from their emotions. Like they don't feel the same intensity of emotions or feel as emotionally connected to other people. There's still this like hesitance for emotional intimacy with others. And that I believe the link here comes from this. The betrayal blindness also means you're cutting yourself off to some emotional development because you're cutting yourself off from having feelings. And when you cut yourself off to having feelings, you stop growing. You stop your progress toward emotional maturity at that point. Right? And so there's this lack of emotional maturity. And so there's this awkwardness and this hesitation to engage in emotionally intimate relationships, but you've already cut yourself off to them. And so you have a tougher time reading a room, a tougher time recognizing social exchanges that are equal or fair, meaning that other people will open up more than they will. And it interferes in relationships across the board in ways that the person who has this, who is over controlled, doesn't really realize. Right. And so reconnecting with emotions is hard when they've been cut off. And so I came across this because of DBT, traditional dialectic behavioral therapy, was created for people who were under-regulated, you know, and were emotionally chaotic, and relying on other people to meet their needs in ways that left people feeling pressured or even manipulated, but it isn't really with intent, even though it feels that way, because they were taught that they weren't worthy enough to have their needs met by asking directly. So they find these back doors in to get their needs met. And that creates emotional, right? Like everybody is their surrogate frontal lobe, right? But on the flip side, you have these people who were also taught that they weren't worthy of getting their needs met, but they manifested in a way that they just decided they wouldn't have needs and they couldn't rely on other people. And so there's a detachment from other people that occurs. And so there's a new way of approaching radically open dialectic behavior therapy that approaches people that it manifested in this other way.
For me, I'm thinking about the fear of abandonment and how it relates back to what I mentioned at the beginning of the video, that we have this like innate need to be a part of a group, and for a number of different reasons.
That plays into this then, because underregulated folks have been taught that they aren't worthy of getting their needs met, but the needs still exist. And one of those needs is to feel like you're part of a group. And so they're trying to sneak in the back door and force people to recognize that they have needs and allow them to be part of the group. On the flip side, people who are over-controlled do have a fear of abandonment, but it's gotten to the point where they are in that learned helplessness stage and they don't feel that they can control anything. So they're denying, right, pretty solidly, they're denying that they have needs at all or that they need others in order to fulfill those needs, including fear of abandonment. Or maybe that's the crux of it all. Because of fear of abandonment, they got tired of putting themselves out there and said, I'm just going to shut this shit down, which you could blame them if you would understand some of the stories behind that.
So the silver lining syndrome can be especially annoying, potentially harmful, definitely irritating, but also confusing to survivors of abuse, because these are the people that are not the truth tellers. These aren't the people that are just saying what happened and being, vulnerable and open and, really being raw with people. That's not what they're doing. And a lot of my clients are truth-telling type people. They'll just tell you what it is. And they also want to know the truth about things. They don't want to live in a reality in which they don't know what's real and what isn't real, where things can be made up and made believe because they're coming out of an environment where they've been gaslit for a super long period of time and experienced psychological abuse. So when things get confusing and I can't tell what's real and what isn't real, that triggers me. So if I'm coming to somebody and trying to talk to them and they have this silver lining syndrome, and I'm saying, here's the things that happened to me, what's that experience going to be like for me then, talking to a person like that?
That's a good question. Most of the people that I've experienced, that I've seen this in, are come across, they're very caring, very loving. They do care about their partner. And I think what they're trying to do is impart this skill, this wisdom on their partner, because they don't understand why you would want to focus on what really happened even, right? I don't think it's really put that way, but it kind of feels that way. Like, why would you want to focus on the bad? Why would you want to focus on what really happened if it's just going to make you feel yucky? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So why don't we just say that maybe you overreacted or you took it the wrong way, or that's not how it went down. And so, I don't know, I've witnessed the partner ends up feeling invalidated and unsupported. And especially in situations where that stuff is going down, when the partner doesn't see it and then goes along with it or skips over it, it can be very painful. Is that what you've noticed?
Yes, it's disturbing for the survivor to be trying to talk about the real parts of their story, the parts that they don't necessarily share with everyone. And here's this nice person. And like you said, they're very nice people. They seem like they're very supportive. But then by the end of the conversation, it's like, well, maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought that it was, or maybe I do just need to forgive them, or maybe I misunderstood. But the other part of it is that, okay, this person isn't a safe person for me to talk to. So it depends on what stage you're in. In one stage, you might be questioning yourself as a result of that conversation and be like, oh my gosh, I have it all wrong. In another version of yourself, a more healed version of yourself, you might go, okay, I see that this is not a safe space for me to discuss this topic. And so therefore, I'm not going to bring it up with this person anymore.
Right. And I'm wondering too, right? If we're seeing this phenomenon, because if you have come from a narcissistic family system as a child, then a safe space, if you don't repeat the pattern, right? But you kind of do the other way. If the safe space for you, these people might come across as being very safe because they don't have needs. They don't see themselves as having needs, right? And so you come from a situation with, emotional incestuous parent, into a situation where somebody's not relying on you for anything. And so you feel like you've gotten into a healthy and a safe relationship. But then, this invalidating happens, right? This invalidation happens, the minimization happens. And then you're stuck there going, wait a minute, I chose a very nice person who clearly cares a lot about me and has a lot of compassion. And so I have to wonder if at times more effort goes into the recovering abused person, right? The person healing from narcissistic abuse, if more effort goes into trying to convince the partner that what happened, and then it flips over into convincing the self, maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought. They care about me and they're not worried about it. Like more of a beating the head on the wall.
The person with silver lining syndrome is someone who seems approachable and that they're helpful and that they're compassionate and caring and even a good listener. But like you mentioned, you wind up feeling kind of icky after the conversation. But how does that person usually feel after the conversation? Probably like they've helped you. They probably feel good about how that they've bestowed upon you, how they have it all figured out, and how that, well, we just need to forgive, or we need to rise above, take the high road, or people are more complicated than that, I'm sure. And wow, there's a lot of wisdom that I just dropped on this person, and I'm sure that I helped. And then they feel this positive reinforcement as they have just sprinkled some positivity on your life today. You were in a negative mental space, but now you might see things a little more positively.
Right.
So I feel good about myself now because I helped someone.
Right. And then, and then their spouse goes off and it's like, oh my gosh, like I really have work to do. I'm not a very patient person. Clearly, I am just as selfish and greedy as my, narcissistic family system led me to believe.
Well, this brings us to a good point about, who we go to when we're trying to get better, and the importance of finding someone who understands your circumstance. It's really nice to go to Aunt Carol. Aunt Carol, I'm sure, is a lovely lady. However, does Aunt Carol have an education, experience, and background on the topic that you're trying to discuss? If not, maybe she's not the person to go to for a topic like this.
Right.
It leads us to be more guarded and more aware of who we share these things with, not because of anything personal about them. It's not that we're saying anything bad about them. It's just, as you are healing, you are in a vulnerable state. And it is important that we do protect ourselves, even from these moments, because it can be fleeting at times. You're having a really great day and things are going well, and one person says one thing and the next thing you know, you're doubting it all. And that's a normal part of recovery, is feeling discombobulated in that way. And these particular silver lining folks are really nice people, but still have a way of leaving you feeling kind of icky or at least confused. And we don't need any more of that going on. We're trying to keep things neat and tidy and clear things up, gain the clarity, find the truth, gain understanding. And that takes a deeper dive. And you'll notice that these conversations tend to sort of cap off at a more surface level often. We're not going to go down into a deep dive. Often the silver lining syndrome situation might be someone also that doesn't feel comfortable examining something that is beyond their realm of understanding, but also that goes too deep into the human condition.
Right, right. Well, and I think too, because they pride themselves on their ability to help people, their virtues of being able to help people see things in a different light or more clearly. I think they also tend to be the last people that we're in touch with in a family system if we're removing ourselves from it. But during that time, they seem to be, oh, they're the one person who cares. They're the, and so the betrayal at times from them, depending on the situation, right, can hit harder than the actual queen bee of the situation, right? The ground zero, than the narcissist or the toxic family member that the system revolves around.
Absolutely. And they may not be keeping your story private because in sharing it with others, they think they're helping.
Mm-hmm.
We all need to know what's going on with her so that we can help her. She came to me and she told me what's happening, and we need to rally and support her. And here's exactly what's going on, and blah, 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 blah.
Right, right. And that brings us back to what you were talking about in the beginning when you were talking about how that drive to be a part of, to be attached, to be a part of the group, to be a part of the system, or then the house of cards will fall.
I like how you're mentioning the path that this would take potentially, and how that this is the type of person that would be the last one you would talk to in the family system.
Yeah,
it's true. I would agree with that. Absolutely. They would be more approachable and seem more non-judgmental, but they also have the ear of everyone else in a way because they are that person that is a good listener. So they're in tune with other things that are going on in the system. And they might be a go-to person at you need to talk to so-and-so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they're the one that turns the blind eye to everybody's faults, right? They've got that betrayal blindness. So because they've turned a blind eye to everybody's faults and they don't see anybody as having a problem or being abusive, they are the one that everybody talks to. But their loyalties still lie with the system, with the attachment, with the thing that they identify themselves with. The group that they feel belonging from. And if you're no longer part of that group and they get to a point where they can't feel like they can bring you back in, they have to reignite or reattach to the group in a solid way.
They have to present as being loyal too. So they have to show that, well, I did speak to them, but I'm still in the group. And demonstrate that I haven't been swayed by that person's opinion. I'm still part of, the circling the wagons aspect of this.
The house of cards will still stand.
Exactly. The house of cards is intact, everyone. Everything's okay. Silver lining syndrome. I know you've run into it before. I certainly have. We know Michelle has. She's the one that came up with it. And we were able to see how the silver lining syndrome encapsulates all these other aspects of being in recovery from narcissistic abuse and the types of individuals that you might encounter along the way, and this phenomenon of not seeing something that's right in front of your face. It's the emperor's new clothes type of a situation. And I think a lot of us are becoming more and more aware of this phenomenon as we see things play out again, on the world stage, in groups and systems, in organizations, but also within our own intimate lives of intimate partner relationships. And it's good to know.
I agree. I want to rename it though now, because The Emperor's New Clothes is one of my favorite stories and one of my favorite songs by Sinead O'Connor.
So what's the new name now?
The Emperor's New Clothes Syndrome.
All right. I like that. Michelle, it's always really fun to talk to you about these topics. I love your creativity and I love how your brain works and how we're able to dig down into something like this and really tease it out. I love it. Thank you for doing this with me.
Thank you for doing this with me. I absolutely love it too.
And thank you to our audience for watching or listening. Goodbye.
Bye.